Our notes today are a little unusual, so please be patient. We're going to be finding the domain and range from a graph. So we have done domain and range from points, where we just list the points. This time we'll be given an actual graph with a line, and we'll have to figure out the domain and range from that. There are two different ways that you can write the domain and range for a graph, and I will accept both ways, so do whichever way you prefer. First of all, remember domain represents the x values, range will represent your y values. And one way that you can write your domain and range is as a coordinate. If you write it as a coordinate, you will use normal parentheses if the number is not included. So that would be if there's an open circle on a graph. You should have learned last year, given an inequality and you graph it on a number line, you can use an open or closed circle. So if you have an open circle, you are using normal parentheses. If you have a closed circle, then you are going to use brackets. And then another way we're going to do it is write it as an inequality. So if you have less than or greater than, that's an open circle. Less than or greater than or equal to would be a closed circle. The inequality part will be the weirdest part. And again, you can choose whichever way you prefer. Most people prefer writing it as a coordinate, but you will see it both ways. So I want to make sure you know how to do both ways. So for number one, I'm going to start with the domain. So for the domain, I want to find what is my furthest to the left x point. So that is 1. So I start with 1. That was an open circle. So open circle, I'm going to use either less than or greater than. If I look, all of my points are to the right of 1, so they are greater than 1. So 1 is the smallest point, so 1 is less than. And then, since we're talking about x coordinates, because we're talking about domain, I'm going to put an x. And then my furthest to the right point was 4. That was a closed circle. Since all of my other points are less than 4, it's to the left of 4, I'm going to use less than or equal to, since it was closed, and 4. So again, I chose 1 because it was my furthest to the left point. My furthest to the left point was an open circle, so I knew it was either less than or greater than. I chose less than because 1 was the smallest point. There's nothing less than 1. So 1 is less than all of my other coordinates. And then I put an x because we're talking about x values, we're talking about the domain. And then my furthest to the right point was 4. 4 was the biggest number. Everything else was less than 4, so I wrote x is less than or equal to 4. And again, it's less than or equal to because of that closed circle. So the inequality part, like I said earlier, is the weirdest part about this. We can also write it as a coordinate where we look, our furthest to left point was 1. It was an open circle, so it says open circle, use a normal parenthesis. And then my furthest to the right point was 4. That was a closed circle, so I use a bracket. So that's just another way to write your answer. Most people prefer the coordinate way, but sometimes you will see it written as an inequality. Your range is your y value. So I'm looking for what is my lowest y value, and that was 1. All of my other coordinates are greater than 1, so 1 is the smallest point, so 1 is less than all my other points. We're talking about y, so I'm going to put a y. And then my furthest to the right point was 7, and all my other points were less than 7, so y is less than or equal to 7. As a coordinate, we would write that 1, 7 bracket. And again, we use a normal parenthesis if it's open and a bracket if it's closed. Okay, so I told you it's going to be weird, so just be patient. It'll make more sense with the more examples we go through. So if we look at number 2, I'm going to find my furthest to the left point, which is right here. I'm just going to estimate that. That's about 0.4. And then my furthest to the right point, right here, is 7, 0. So my domain would be the smallest point was 0. And then that was closed, so less than or equal to, talk about x values, less than or equal to 7. So this just tells me my points can be less than 7, or my points can be greater than 0. It's anywhere between 0 and 7. As a coordinate, we would write that bracket 0, 7, bracket. Your range, you're looking for your smallest or your lowest point and your highest point. Your highest point looks like it's right here. So that's probably about 1.84. Then your lowest point about right here, that's maybe 5.8, -2. So the lowest that my graph ever got was -2. Less than or equal to, we're talking about y, so y, less than or equal to, the highest point was 4. So this just tells me y is anything less than 4 and y is anything greater than -2. So as a coordinate, that would be -2, 4, using brackets. Okay, moving on to number 3, which is just a giant circle. So start off with the domain. So the furthest left point, that looks like it's at -1, 0. And my furthest right point looks like it's at 5, 0. So my domain is going to be -1. It's closed, so less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to my furthest right point, 5. So again, that just tells me x can be anything between -1 and 5. Your range, your lowest point was right here, so that looks like it's at 2, -3. Your highest point right here looks like it's at 2, 3. So the lowest point, -3, is less than or equal to, we're talking about y's, which is less than or equal to the highest point, 3. The domain written as a coordinate would be bracket -1, 5, bracket. And then the coordinate for range would be -3, 3. Number 4 and number 5 are both a little strange. When I try to find my furthest to the left point, I notice these arrows. These arrows tell me that it's going to keep going and going and going and going, which means there is no definite left point. It's just going to keep going. And the same thing's going to happen with my right. It's going to keep going and going and going, which means I have no definite left point, no definite right point. So that means my domain can be all real numbers. And if we want to write that as a coordinate, it would be -infinity to infinity, because it can go as far to the negatives as we want or far to the positives as we want. We are going to use normal parentheses just because I don't know where it's going to end, so it's kind of unsure. So we're just going to use normal parentheses. For range, I do have a lowest point that's at 2, -1. But my range is going to keep going up and up and up, which means y values can be anything bigger than -1. So y is greater than or equal to -1. And then as a coordinate, that would be written -1, and then it's going to keep going up and up and up, so that's infinity. For number 5, my domain is going to keep going to the left and keep going to the right because of those arrows. So my domain is all real numbers. And again, you can write that as -infinity, infinity. And then your range, if I notice, is going to keep going down and it's going to keep going up. So the range is also all real numbers, which can also be written as -infinity, infinity. For number 6, my furthest to the left point is right here, which is at 1, 2, 3, 4, -4, 2. So that takes me to -4. Actually, I'm going to write this a little differently. My domain is going to keep going to the right. So this just tells me my x or my domain can be anything bigger than -4. So x is greater or equal to -4. As a coordinate, that would be written as -4, infinity. And then your range, the lowest point was 2, and it's going to keep going up and up and up because of that arrow. It's going to go up slightly, but it's still going to go up. So your range is anything bigger than 2, so y is greater than or equal to 2. As a coordinate, that would be 2, infinity. So again, I know that that is really weird section. It is not something that we will do very often this year, but it is still something that you should know how to do. So if you have questions, which I'm guessing you will, please feel free to email me.